Welcome back, everybody. We are back in another chapter of the Bible, Esther chapter 3 today. And if you remember last time, Esther chapter 2, Esther became the queen over Queen Vashti. Um, she didn't want that. She wasn't sort of seeking that, but God placed her in that position. And we talked about God sort of using these seasons that seem somewhat ordinary in our lives, but using those seasons to prepare us for something bigger, something better. And that's what we saw with Esther. At the end of the chapter, we saw Mordecai basically uncover an assassination plot against King Xerxes, and they recorded that in the record so that he was officially the one that saved the king's life. All right, chapter 3. Here's the question that I want to ask us generally before we start talking about Esther chapter 3. Have you ever watched someone absolutely lose their mind over something small, something that seemed small? And I'll give you an example. One time, someone handed me an anger management flyer, and I lost it. I lost it. I'm sorry. But have you ever seen a moment where, like, maybe a grown adult unravels because somebody didn't clap for them, or somebody didn't like their post, or someone didn't say thank you with enough enthusiasm? Now imagine that person having political power of a small empire. And with that, welcome to Esther chapter 3. So we're in the Persian Empire. This is a huge, powerful, wealthy empire. And the book of Esther takes place during the reign of a fellow named King Xerxes. The Jewish people are living in exile. They're scattered throughout the empire. They're not in control. They're not culturally dominant. They're just surviving. And in chapter 3, we meet a fellow named Haman. Haman? No. But let me just tell you about Haman. If insecurity was one person, Haman would be that guy. So chapter 3 opens with Haman. He's being promoted. He's elevated above all the other officials. He gets a big title, a big chair, probably some sort of sash that went across his body like this to let people know that he was the number 2, the assistant to the emperor. Not the assistant emperor, to be clear, the assistant to the emperor. But anyhow, he's given this promotion. The king sort of commands everyone, hey, everyone is to bow down to Haman. And everybody does, except for that fella Mordecai who had just uncovered an assassination plot in the previous chapter. Mordecai refuses to bow. Now, we are not told explicitly why Mordecai refuses to bow, whether it was a dislike of Haman or whether it was some sort of religious conviction that says, hey, I only bow to one God. But a small factoring piece might be that Haman was an Agagite. 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 I have no idea how to pronounce that. He was an Agagite. And he was a descendant of Israel's ancient enemy. So there might be some sort of lingering hatred there for Mordecai to Haman, but also from Haman to Mordecai. Whatever the reason, Mordecai, he does not bow to Haman. And this is where things change dramatically. Haman, obviously, he notices that Mordecai is not bowing down, and he becomes very angry. Let's read verse 5. It says, when Haman saw that Mordecai would not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. He wasn't irritated. He wasn't slightly bothered. He was literally filled with rage. And I just picture him walking by like, bow, bow, bow. Why is that man over there not bowing? Hey, bow. So Haman, rather than saying, hey, I'm angry and I want to take this out on Mordecai, I want to deal with this one fella. No. Verse 6 says this. Haman had learned of Mordecai's nationality, so he decided that it was not enough to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Instead, he looked for a way to destroy all of the Jews throughout the entire empire of King Xerxes. Instead of saying, hey, I'm going to punish that one man over there for not bowing to me, he says, I think I'd like to destroy all of the Jews throughout the entire empire. I mean, that escalated rather quickly, am I right? One guy doesn't bow, and now we're talking about genocide legislation. I mean, that is insane. Now, personally speaking, I have never run a Persian empire, but I have overreacted to a situation before. I've never issued an empire-wide decree just because someone bruised my ego, but I have definitely replayed a minor slight over and over in my head like it was a global conspiracy. So I can see some sort of relation here between the way that Haman's reacting and maybe poor choices that I have made. But what's underneath all of this is wounded pride, and I think we can all associate with that. Having our pride wounded to the point where we are now triggered, and now we are mad. Now, Haman's issue wasn't power, he had plenty of that. It wasn't his position, he had that. It was simply that one person refused to bow, refused to validate him, and that one dissenting voice, I think that exposed how fragile his sense of worth really was. And I think, if we're honest with ourselves, that hits uncomfortably close to home for a lot of us. Verse 8 says that then Haman approached King Xerxes and said, "There's a certain race of people scattered throughout all the provinces of your empire who keep themselves separate from everyone else. Their laws are different from those of any other people, and they refuse to obey the laws of the king. So it is not in the king's interest to let them live." Now, notice that Haman is being kind of vague with who these people are. He's just saying, hey, there's a group of people out there that practice different practices. They don't obey your commands, and I think you should kill them all. And so King Xerxes, in his sort of detached leader fashion, says, here's my signet ring. Do whatever seems right to you. Do whatever seems good to you. He doesn't investigate. He doesn't question whether or not this is the right thing to do from Haman. He just simply says, yeah, sure. Do whatever you feel is good. So a decree is written, it's sealed, it's sent all over the empire, and verse 13 tells us what it says. Dispatches were sent by swift messengers into all provinces of the empire, giving the order that all Jews, young and old, including women and children, must be killed, slaughtered, and annihilated on one single day. This was scheduled to happen on March 7th of the next year. The property of the Jews would be given to those who killed them. Basically, they're arranging this mass genocide against the Jews on this one day, and they're sending it out to all the provinces, and they're incentivizing people to participate in the killing of these Jews by saying, hey, whoever you kill, their possessions now belong to you. So then the very end of Esther chapter 3 says this in verse 15. At the king's command, the decree went out by swift messengers, and it was also proclaimed in the fortress of Susa. Then the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa fell into confusion. So the two guys at the head of all of this, they're casually sitting down and having a drink while an entire population is staring at a death sentence. And that is where chapter 3 ends. And what's crazy is that, again, in chapter 3, God's name is not mentioned anywhere at all in this chapter. Actually, in the entire book of Esther, God is never explicitly named. But yet his providence is humming underneath everything that is happening here, because here is what I know to be true. Haman thinks he's in control. The king thinks he's in control. Maybe from the outside looking in, the empire looks to be in control, but the story isn't over here. And that matters tremendously for you and me, because sometimes I think we live in those seasons of our lives where moments where the wrong person maybe was promoted, where pride seems to win, where power is abused, where decisions are made in rooms that we will never get to enter, and where the faithful seem small and exposed. And to take it one step further, maybe in seasons where God just seems quiet. I know I've had moments like that, like those moments where you stop and you think, God, are you seeing this? But Esther chapter 3 reminds me that silence is not absence. When God feels silent, that does not mean he's absent. God never panics. He doesn't rush. He doesn't need to schedule a press conference to give us all updates on kind of what he's thinking, where he's at throughout all of this. It's a reminder that he is simply setting the stage for greater things to come. And there was a few things that kind of stuck out to me as I read through this chapter. First, unchecked ego is dangerous. I think we all can agree that that is a true statement. Unchecked pride, unchecked ego is extremely dangerous. It's not just an annoying or an irritating thing, it's absolutely dangerous. Haman's insecurity didn't stay internal. It became policy across the entire empire. It became violence against this Jewish people, and it affected thousands and thousands of people. It makes me ask myself the question, where does my pride quietly shape my decisions that I am making, whether it's at home or at work, or maybe it's serving in the church or wherever I might be? Where is my pride quietly shaping my decisions that I am making? When I feel like someone has done something wrong to me, am I reacting emotionally, or am I thinking through things logically? Sometimes, if we're not careful, we can exaggerate the offense, and so maybe something small that was done to us can turn into what seems like a bigger deal just simply because we're so wounded, we start lashing out. Here's what I know. Most destruction starts with a bruised ego that never got checked, never got examined. Second thing that I noticed here in this chapter is that it all starts at the top. Leaders set the example, leaders set the climate, leaders are the thermostat that controls the temperature of the rest of the room, the rest of the empire in this case. The king's passivity towards, hey, yes, Haman, just do whatever you want, honestly, it's a little stunning. He hands over authority to Haman to do this thing without any real discernment. And I think about myself in positions of leadership that I have in my life as a husband, as a father, as somebody with influence with the people around me, perhaps. When I disengage, someone else will fill that vacuum, and it's usually not something good. So I have to be careful that when I am leading with true discernment, because indifference can be just as destructive as aggression. And last but not least, God is at work even in those seasons where he feels silent. This chapter, if you look at it in an isolated sense, it closes with confusion in the city. It closes with fear in the streets. It closes with two powerful men toasting to a decision that will devastate so many lives. But yet, God is already positioning Esther. He's already stirring courage in her heart. He's already weaving threads into the story that nobody else can see. So maybe today, for you and me, the invitation is simple: examine your pride, lead responsibly where in places where God has put you in a position of leadership, whether it's at home, as a father or mother, whether it's at work as a boss, a coworker, whether it is just people around you that you have influence with. Lead responsibly. Then stay faithful even when it might cost you something, and trust that God's silence is not his absence. If you're ever in a season or a moment where things feel confusing, unfair, or heavy, just know that the story is not over for you. The story is not over for me, because won't he do it?